Hi, I'm Jo from J.H.Leather, and in our final episode of the Leathercraft 101 mini-series, we are going to be making our first project, which is the leather coaster. So the leather we are going to be using for our coaster is 1.5mm thick, and it is vegetable tanned. So the first thing we're going to do is start by gluing our two pieces of leather together. Now the glue I'm using for this is the Eco Stick 1816B. And what we're going to do is we're going to put a small amount over the back side, so on the flesh side of both of our pieces. So once your glue has started to go tacky, what you can do is glue your two pieces of leather together, like so. So for our coaster, we are going to be using this acrylic template, and there is a free download on my website, which is linked in the description, where you can download a 4-pack of coaster designs that you can use. And there is also going to be a 4-pack acrylic template set of the same coasters, which you can purchase through my website. And then placing your coaster pattern onto your piece of leather, we can then draw around that with our scratch awl. So to cut out our coaster, to start with, we are going to be using a rotary knife and a safety ruler. So we're going to start by cutting the straight sides. So if you put your ruler on and line that up with your drawn edge, you can then take your rotary cutter and then follow the edge of the ruler. Now you don't need to cut this in one go. You can go over this a few times just to make sure that the ruler doesn't slip. And we're going to repeat that for the next 3 sides. So you should have your coaster looking a little bit like this, and we can now look at doing the corners. So for cutting the corners on my coaster, I am going to be using my single head knife. And the way that I'm going to cut the corner is actually by taking lots of smaller pieces off as I go, and follow the line that we drew on from around our pattern. And so what I'm doing is actually keeping my knife relatively straight to where it is, and I'm actually turning the leather coaster into the knife as I cut around this corner. So you should now have your coaster looking something like this. So the next thing we're going to do is take an edge tool, and the one that I have here is 1mm wide, and we're going to reduce the sharpness on the edges of our coaster. And so what we're going to do is we're going to run our edge tool around the edge of our leather. So we want to hold this so it's nice and flat against our leather at a 45-degree angle, and then we're just going to push this and take off a small amount of leather from the edge. And we are going to be doing that on both sides of our coaster. So the next step would be to put some edge finish onto these cut edges of our leather. Now, as my coaster is two-tone in design, what I'm actually going to do is just put a clear layer of the Tolkanol on. And this is just going to enhance the colours that are already there. Alternatively, you can use a dye. Now my preference is for a water-based dye to put on the edges of my leather. Now you would put this on in a similar way to the Tolkien where you apply it to the edges of your leather, and then using a cloth or a burnishing stick, you will then burnish the edges and get them nice and shiny. And so what I'm going to do is just apply some of that Tolkien to the edges of my leather. I'm going to rub that in and then give it a minute or so to absorb into the leather. And then I'm going to use a stain cloth or just a cloth rag here to remove any of the excess Tolkien from the front side of my leather. And then using the same cloth, what I'm going to do is rub that on the edge of my leather. And with the friction that that's going to create, I'm going to get a nice shiny edge here. Now, an added step that you can do once you have done polishing the edges of your coaster is to use a creaser to put a crease edge around your coaster. Now, this isn't functional and you don't have to do it, it just fancies the coaster up a little bit. And so what we're going to do is we're going to heat that up so we get a nice permanent line. And so once our crease has been heated up, we can then draw our line onto both sides of our coaster. Now, when you're heating the creaser, you don't want to get that too hot because it can burn the leather. So my suggestion is that you have some test scrap pieces of leather to test on before going on to your actual project. And again, we're going to be going around both sides. And so our coaster should now look like this if you have chosen to put that crease line on. Now the next thing we're going to do is set our dividers to 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters. And so what we're going to do is pick one side of our coaster to be the side that we're going to stitch mark on, and we're going to draw our divider line all the way around. Now we've got our divider line on, we can do our stitch marking. So for me, the stitch markers that I'm going to use are going to be my 3.38 pricking irons. Now you can use diamond irons and punch all the way through if that is what you prefer, but this is what I'm going to be using for mine. So for the stitch marking, what I like to do is actually line the front side, or the side farthest away from me, of my pricking iron in that line. So generally, to start with, what you can do is hold it up to that line, and then you can roll it up, and that's going to be in the right place. And I'm going to stitch mark from left to right, and we will overlap that by one tooth so we know we're going to be in line, and we're going to work our way around the coaster. Now when we get to the corners, it's easier to use a smaller iron here, so I'm going to use this 2-tooth one. And we're going to again follow that line as we hit our stitch markers around the corner of our coaster. And as I am using prick markers, I don't need to punch them all the way through because I'm going to be making my holes with my awl. Now, when we get towards the end of our stitch marking, we want our stitch marks to join up. Now, for me, luckily that's going to turn out quite well, and this prick mark size works really well for this coaster. However, if it is slightly too long or too short, what you can do is put your stitch marker into one of the holes and slightly push it or pull it, depending on how far off your stitch marks is. That should help even them out. And so you should now have your coaster looking a little bit like this. And what we're going to do is get some thread ready so we can start stitching. The thread I'm going to be using for this project is a wax polyester thread, which is great for beginner crafters. So what we're going to do is take a double arm's length, just cut that. And we can now thread our needles. So what we're going to do is have 2 needles on our thread, and we're going to lock them off. Now, more detailed information on stitching can be found in our stitching video, which I will link at the end of this video and in the description. Now, a double arm span of thread should be enough to stitch all the way around our coaster. So what I'm going to do is start in one of the corners, put my needle through, and then even my threads up. Now, because we should be able to get around this in one go, what I'm going to do is just start stitching towards me, and I'm not going to perform a back stitch. So I'm going to awl the next hole and stitch forwards towards me. And so what we're going to do is we're going to double hand stitch all the way around this coaster. Now, this coaster is a great project to learn how to stitch on because there is quite a lot of stitching involved. So you're going to start to get that muscle memory needed for your other projects. Okay, so when we get to the end of our stitching, what we're going to do is make sure all our stitching joins up. So we're going to go into that last hole, like so, and then we're going to do 1.5 back stitches. So go backwards for 1 full stitch, making sure our stitches lay side by side rather than one on top of the other. And then with the thread on our right hand side, we're going to go backwards for 1 more so that both threads end up on the same side of our coaster, making sure that they sit side by side and then pulling tight. And we can now trim our threads. So your coaster should now look something like this. And as we have used polyester thread, what we can do is with a lighter, we can just melt the very ends of our threads carefully there on the back side. And we are now ready to do some finishing touches. So what I'm going to do is actually go over the edges again with the Tolkanol and get that nice and polished, as well as go around once more with my creasing iron. And hopefully your coaster should now look like this and you can get using it. And so that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching and you learned something new. And if you did like the video, please give it a thumbs up to let YouTube know and to help share this video with other crafters. So thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you in the next video.